Becoming popular is no easy feat. A new study finds that kids trying to improve their social status in school also increases the risk that they'll be harassed by peers. The higher they climb the school social ladder, the greater the risk they'll be bullied. Robert Ferris is a lead author of the study on social combat and associate professor of sociology at UC Davis in California. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thanks very much for having me.
We don't usually think of popular kids being the target of bullies. What say you about this?
Yeah, I think that's sort of this research does kind of challenge some of the stereotypes about bullying and the victims of bullying. What we're finding is that it affects a wider range of kids than we previously thought.
So how do you go about conducting this kind of a study?
Well, we started with an ongoing study that was in place already in North Carolina. It involved slightly more than 4,200 adolescents, and we followed them over the course of a school year. And we were collecting information about their friends, who their friends are specifically, and also who they pick on and who picked on them.
How are kids climbing this social ladder different than the more traditional kids who were bullied?
I think what we see in our study are really two different patterns, I think. One does fit the traditional profile of victims, where we've got kids who are vulnerable and different, and we do see that they're getting picked on. And specifically, we found that kids who are complete isolates, who have no friends whatsoever, kids who are physically underdeveloped, and kids who have very poor body image are all at heightened risk of being victimized. And that sort of fits the traditional pattern. But we found the second pattern, where kids are who are relatively popular and high status are increasingly at risk of being targeted by their peers. And we think that's driven by the competition for status.
What do you think the differences are in your research on the difference between girls and boys engaging in this social combat against each other?
Well, we see that both groups are highly involved. In some of our earlier research, we were focused on trying to understand who were the aggressors. And it turns out that in our data, both boys and girls are equally aggressive. But in this paper, we found that girls are more frequently the victims of aggression. And what we found was that the highest rates of aggression were between girls, followed by between boys. But boys pick on girls much more often than girls pick on boys. And so while boys and girls may be equally aggressive, they're both disproportionately targeting girls.
What solutions do you come up with, having done your research?
Well, we have yet to come up with a real solution to this problem. Unfortunately, bullying prevention programs, despite a lot of claims to the contrary, are often have not been proven to be effective, at least. And in some cases where they have been rigorously tested, some have been counterproductive, many are ineffectual, and the few that are effective produce relatively modest reductions in bullying. And so I think part of that is that they may be focusing on the more traditional pattern and ignoring the role that the competition for status plays in aggression.
Well, any information we can get certainly helps us, especially us parents. Robert, thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you very much for having me.
You can read much more about the study in Lois Collins' article, which can be found at DeseretNews.com. This next story shows a unique way to counter the negative effects of social combat.
Words can build you up, words can break you down, start a fire in your heart or put it out.
A youth group video set to the song Words by Hawk Nelson. In it, each boy in the LDS church group wrote something positive on a note card about each girl in the group. Each time the video shows a girl turning over her poster board to read it, there are smiles all around. This message about the positive power of words has gone viral. And we asked some of those involved with the video what they thought about the reaction their little production is getting. Take a look.
The young men came up with this idea to have an experiment on the words and the positive effect that they could have on the young women in our neighborhood.
None of us had any idea what was going to happen for this musical video. We just knew we needed to bring some games that dealt with words.
They kept it pretty hush-hush, and they didn't let the young women know what was going on.
I watched the young women turn the signs around and read the positive things that the young men had to say about them. Every young woman just lit up.
Just pure happiness. The girls were they were on cloud nine.
It's weird having everyone at school be like, I saw you in this video, and I'll be like, oh, did you now?
I cry over Kaya's part every time. Every time. I think just the immediate reaction on her face and the joy that we could see in her eyes.
But it's also really cool to see it go viral because then, like, everyone can see what we did.
I just think it's amazing to see how it's spreading already. We have one of our young women showed the video in their school and then went back into each individual classroom, and the school had the classes do this activity in their classrooms. And I love that this is spreading.
We need positivity.
We're influencing people every day with our words, whether it's for good or for bad. And if we can realize the impact that it has on other people's lives, why not lift people up instead of tearing them down?
That is a great idea. The neuroscience of spirituality and religion is almost completely unknown. But as Carol Makita reports, researchers at the University of Utah are trying to understand how religious experience shapes the brain.
This is not your typical MRI scan.
We want to actually look at brain activity when people are experiencing spiritual or religious types of feelings.
Researchers Jeffrey Anderson, Michael Ferguson, and Jared Nielsen launched this unique study in February at the University of Utah.
It's staggering how little information there is about traditional spiritual experiences and the brain.
This group has previously studied autism, Down syndrome, and Zen masters, and after 5 years of discussing such a project, decided to tackle the effect of religion on the brain.
It's so thrilling that we're finally at a point in the technological development where we can look at the brain with this type of precision and resolution.
We're all come from spiritual and religious backgrounds and very interested in understanding how those affect the brain.
The research team recruited members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who recently served missions as participants.
As part of practicing their faith, people from an early age are trained to recognize those feelings and identify them. And that's really critical for an MRI type study.
Participants undergo an hour-long MRI scan during which they will take part in a set program made up of scripture.
We're wanting to ask questions that are deeply personal and that so many people feel.
Our brain has the same kind of mechanisms to respond to religious experience, whether that comes from an evangelical spiritual experience, a Buddhist spiritual experience, or an LDS spiritual experience.
Ferguson, a PhD student in the Department of Bioengineering, says the brain and religion are an obvious pairing.
That intersection of religion and of this supremely social organ, the human brain, is such a necessary set of questions for us to be exploring.
Very interesting. Carol Makita reporting. Next, a man gives himself a unique challenge. 4 weeks to deliver random acts of kindness. See the life-changing results when Deseret News Sunday edition continues.